Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today we are embarking on a truly fascinating exploration of an ancient textual evolution. We're going to trace the concept of the Holy Spirit across a massive library of historical texts, and we'll watch how the descriptions of this entity radically shift and transform over time. You see, we aren't just reading history here. We're actually looking at how ancient writers conceptualized power, community, and ultimately, absolute peace.
So what connects a riddle about a lion, a rushing wind, and a trance on a rooftop? I know, it sounds like the setup to a really strange joke, doesn't it? But we're going to see exactly how this completely disparate collection of wild stories actually weaves together to create a massive, unified narrative about human transformation. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today's journey. 1. The Spirit of Power. 2. The Promised Advocate. 3. Pentecost and New Boundaries. 4. One Body, Many Parts. And 5. The Fruit of Freedom.
Section 1, the Spirit of Power. Sudden bursts of supernatural strength. Starting with some of the absolute oldest texts we are looking at today, found deep in the Hebrew Bible, the Spirit is definitely not described as a gentle, comforting presence, not at all. It's depicted as a sudden, overwhelming, and honestly, highly violent physical or prophetic force that just completely overtakes a person. A perfect example of this is the story of Samson. The Book of Judges describes Samson walking near the vineyards of Timnah when a young lion suddenly roars toward him. The text specifically says the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, allowing Samson to literally tear the lion apart with his bare hands like was a young goat. It's this unpredictable, massive burst of superhuman physical empowerment.
But what's wild is what happens next. Sometime later, Samson finds a swarm of bees and honey just sitting inside the lion's carcass. This bizarre, incredibly visceral event leads to a famous riddle he poses at a feast. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. It's brilliant, really. The text uses this raw physical manifestation of the Spirit to set up a surprisingly complex intellectual challenge for his companions. And listen, Samson is by no means an isolated case here. Across these early texts, the Spirit pretty consistently operates this exact way. In 1 Samuel, the Spirit comes powerfully upon Saul, causing him to prophesy with such intense energy that people actually say he was changed into a different person. Even when we move into the early gospel narratives, the Spirit remains a driving, forceful entity. I mean, it literally drives Jesus into the harsh wilderness to be tempted. And John the Baptist? He describes it as a coming baptism of fire. It overtakes individuals to accomplish highly specific, usually very intense tasks.
Section 2, the Promised Advocate, from external force to internal guide.
Now here is where we see a truly profound textual shift within the Gospel of John. The whole concept of the Spirit undergoes a radical evolution. In chapters 14 and 16, Jesus is preparing his disciples for his departure, and he introduces the Spirit as the Advocate, or the Spirit of Truth. This completely flips the paradigm. The Spirit is no longer just some temporary possession that makes you, tear apart a lion. It is now promised as a permanent internal helper specifically designed to guide, remind, and comfort the disciples.
You can really feel the emotional weight of this textual shift. It's immense. Jesus tells them, "I will not leave you as orphans." He openly acknowledges that, yes, in this world they are going to have trouble, but the Spirit is framed here as the ultimate antidote to their impending grief. It's suddenly a provider of deep, steady internal peace. But watch what happens when this internal peace suddenly goes very, very public.
Section 3, Pentecost and New Boundaries, the explosive birth of a community. Entering the book of Acts, this internal advocate stops being a promise to just a few isolated individuals and becomes completely democratized across a massive, diverse crowd. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer velocity of the narrative in chapter 2. It is wild. At 9 a.m., a sound like a violent wind fills a house. Boom. By 9:01, visual manifestations, literally tongues of fire, rest on the believers. Just minutes later, they are speaking out loud in completely unlearned foreign languages. Peter immediately steps up to contextualize this using ancient prophecy, and by the end of that exact same day, a staggering 3,000 people are integrated into this brand new community. And we have to talk about who was there, because this specific day was an absolute demographic miracle. The text goes well out of its way to list all these distinct groups: Parthians, Medes, Egyptians, Romans, Cretans, and Arabs. We are talking about highly diverse nations completely separated by geography and culture who are suddenly and remarkably united by hearing one single message in their own native tongues.
It's like the Spirit is acting as this ultimate universal translator and unifier. But the text pushes these boundaries even further in Acts chapter 10. So Peter falls into a trance on a roof and sees a vision of animals that were strictly considered religiously unclean. A voice commands him to eat, stating, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean." Then the Spirit actively directs Peter to the home of Cornelius. Now, Cornelius is a Roman centurion, a Gentile. And to the absolute jaw-dropping shock of the Jewish believers, the Spirit pours out on the Gentiles exactly as it did on them. It is actively dismantling centuries-old religious boundaries right before their eyes.
Section 4. One body, many parts. Organizing the chaos.
Now, as you can probably imagine, bringing together thousands of diverse, heavily energized people created some serious logistical headaches. In Paul's letters to the Corinthians, he really has to figure out how to structure this massive, sudden influx of Spirit-empowered individuals. So he uses a bit of humor and a fantastic architectural analogy to organize things. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? It's a hilarious, totally absurd image, right? Just a giant blinking eyeball rolling around. He's using this to show that a community, much like a human body, requires completely different parts functioning together just to survive. Paul then lists out the specific parts or spiritual gifts present in this new community: wisdom, knowledge, healing, miraculous powers, prophecy, speaking in tongues. As you can see, these abilities are wildly different from one another. But Paul's major underlying argument is that every single one of these gifts is distributed by the exact same Spirit. And crucially, they aren't given for showing off. They are specifically for the common good of the entire group.
To actually manage this, Paul introduces some pretty strict rules for what's called intelligible worship. Basically, this is the practice of prioritizing clear, understandable communication that actually builds up the people listening. In 1 Corinthians 14, Paul straight up tells them that thousands of uninterpreted words spoken in a trance state are practically useless compared to just 5 clear words of instruction. He firmly grounds this in the core principle that God is not a God of disorder, but of peace.
Section 5. The fruit of freedom. The daily lived experience.
Okay, so we've seen the Spirit act as physical power, a boundary breaker, and an organizer. Now, exploring the text of Romans, Galatians, and 1 John, we're going to look at how these writers defined the ultimate psychological and moral result of the Spirit's presence in a person's life. So the crucial point is, in texts like Galatians 5, Paul draws a razor-sharp contrast. On one side, the acts of the flesh represent human destructiveness, hatred, discord, jealousy, rage, and factions. But on the other side, the fruit of the Spirit represents ultimate spiritual maturity: love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The Spirit is no longer just about doing flashy miracles. It's about fundamentally reforming human character. And in Romans chapter 8, Paul takes this even deeper with a genuinely profound theological argument. The text explains that the Spirit fundamentally changes a person's core identity. It replaces a paradigm of fear and slavery with adoption to sonship. Actually, it's more like it allows believers to approach the divine with profound, unprecedented intimacy, crying out, "Abba, Father," entirely free from any condemnation. This leads right into what might legitimately be one of the most soaring, powerful conclusions in all of ancient literature. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, will be able to separate us from the love of God. This right here is the ultimate destination of our textual journey today. Think about it. The chaotic, overwhelming force that once ripped apart lions has evolved into the guarantor of unbreakable, universal love.
The first epistle of John perfectly, and I mean perfectly, summarizes this evolution. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. According to these texts, the absolute defining characteristic of the Spirit of truth isn't violence, it isn't chaos, and it certainly isn't fear. It is the total perfection of love and the complete elimination of fear from the human heart. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. How might this ancient vision, transforming chaotic power into a unified community of diverse gifts and perfect love, actually change the way we view our own fractured modern world? It's an absolutely incredible evolution from power to peace, and just a stunning piece of textual history. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive on The Explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will see you next time.